Hey guys, I'm Chris, and today we're going to be talking about my Neuro bass sound design that I did for my OSC track, and it sounds something like this. Okay, so that's kind of the first part of the bass. What I'm going to do is as you can see, per my usual strategy, there's a lot of layers to this bass. And but the thing is a lot of the layers were created by duplicating the first layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk through how I made it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of the master effects. And I think I'll just turn off all the effects on the quote bass bus, and we'll go through the sounds one at a time. So I'll just solo this guy by itself. It's really quiet now. Okay, so you can already tell there's a pretty huge difference. Let's first look at the patch. So first of all, let me just say, I really like making these kind of sounds. They're really fun, these Neuro bass sounds, and I mean, I could make them for hours. Having said that, this synth's actually kind of challenging because I'm used to kind of doing it with something like Massive or any kind of wavetable synth or an FM kind of synth that seems easier. But in this case, I have to use the synth that we're allowed to use, right? So this is the patch. So it's really actually pretty straightforward. It's a unison oscillator setup to make it louder and bigger. I've got saw pulse and pulse on, and again, there's no really method of the madness other than just experimentation and a little bit of noise. Just to grit it up a little bit, make it a little bit more gritty, nasty. Set the filter appropriately. And there's not really much on the envelope there. It's pretty open. So if you keep the cutoff really low, i.e. turn the envelope all the way down so that the filter's not opening at all, so you have the sustain cranked way up over here on the filter envelope, you get one of these like really cool low pass resounds, which I love that bass. That's like my favorite sound ever. That really simple, just like tons of saws, low pass filter bass. I don't know what it is. Any drum and bass track that has a really cool res in it, I love it. So that's kind of what I started out with, and I've made thousands of these, probably, well, maybe not thousands, but dozens. And so I just kind of made the gnarliest thing I could and then opened the envelope. So the idea here, right, is I want to get a lot of the bass frequencies, but then I also wanted to have a lot of harmonics because I want it to get raspy. And this sound doesn't have a lot of movement. I've got the LFO on, but I didn't want it to get too frequency modulating in the sense or even pulse width modulating, because the sound almost becomes too random or haphazard. But, I thought this was a pretty good starting point. So for those of you that don't know, in drum and bass, and I do this too, I resample a lot. So like if I was doing this to make a track, like if you listen to any of my other tracks and stuff, I do a ton of resampling. So I'll make a sound like this, sample it down, load it into a sampler, and then start affecting it, sample it again, reverse it, mess it all up again, chop it up, reverse it again, that kind of stuff. So I can't do that. So what I do is I take the same approach here. So you can see the channel strip over here on the lower left is just totally loaded with plugins. So what I have on there, I have this bass amp. This is a built-in Logic plugin. So without it, yeah, so that's starting to get that raspy. It's kind of taking some of the boxiness out. Thought that sounded pretty cool. And then I've got an auto filter. And the thing that's cool about Logic's auto filter is you can add this distortion without it, with it. And not only do you get some of this, you can hear the movement in there, right? Because that's one other thing about these basses is you want to have a lot of movement in them. And you can also actually add these distortions, and I like this scream mode. It is pretty cool. It's kind of like a hidden feature in the plugin. It sounds really nice. Then channel EQ, so without it, with it. Oh yeah. So that's really starting to get that Neuro high end. You know, really boosting the highs here. And I'm overdriving the output, sorry. Your ears are probably dying. Okay, there we go. And that's doing a lot of work, actually. And then again, another auto filter. So this filter's the filters are kind of like moving like this. It kind of gives like a 3D effect or something. It just kind of makes the bass, I don't know, just have a little bit more movement. Yeah, I've got the output turned down a bit there. And then another channel EQ, but check this out. This channel EQ, if I actually play the track, so what's going on there? I've created a notch filter and I've automated the notch because one thing you can't do in these One Synth challenges is use chorus effects or anything like that. So what I'm trying to do is kind of sweep this notch around and kind of like create this tearing sound, like, you know, and, you know, there's some really cool plugins you can buy. I don't have any of them that are actually like, you know, multi-pole notch filter type things. But this kind of gives you that same effect, and it's kind of neat. And you can kind of haphazardly just play with the mouse on your track, and it's a whole lot of fun just to kind of get those movements in there. So if we look at the automation on that channel, see if I can find it. I was trying to find it during the intro. That's not it. Sorry. Let's see. Channel EQ. Man, I am bad at this. Channel EQ. Yeah, so you can see the automation. So I draw all that in by hand, quote unquote, or I'll use a MIDI control to do that. And I just do it by ear, and I do a bunch of takes, and I just say whichever one sounds the best. And then like this part right here where it's about to fall, there's a pitch bend on the synth. So if I was to look at the MIDI part and view the pitch bend, you can see there's a big pitch bend down here that goes wow, 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 wow. I love that sound, and I use it all the time. It's so cool. It's overdone, but trust me, it's cool. All right, so then what we got? Another channel EQ. And so I guess what I'm doing here is, again, going with that resampling concept. You know, I'm kind of pretending, okay, if I resampled this bass now, what would I do next? Probably I'd go back, and after I've added all these auto filters and distortions, I'd probably go back through and just make sure that, okay, I'm going to re-EQ the thing because I've probably lost some of the low end or the high end's too bright or something, and this is what I came up with there. So that's all it's doing. Then a silver verb. You know, honestly, I think that the silver verb was added, and then I took it out because I think I actually used a bus reverb send, so I'm not even really using that. Another channel EQ. This is probably more for mixing. You might wonder why I boosted and then I took it out. Again, working fast and just kind of trying out sounds. I probably added this EQ later in the game and realized I needed to take some out at 200 to make room for the snare and maybe get some of that mid bass back. So without it, and with it. So just get some of that mid-range frequency back in there that I might have missed. Spread. The spread is a built-in Logic plugin that kind of adds stereo image to the thing. And I almost didn't use this because I was wondering if it was kind of cheating, like it's a modulation effect, but it's not modulating. All it's doing is kind of, you can see what it's doing at certain frequency bands. It's putting stuff in different places in the stereo image. So obviously I'm not doing anything in the low end and just affecting the highs. And that's just to give it a little bit of stereo. So just kind of lightly applied. And here's a multipressor. So without it. With it. So it's just kind of acting as like a dynamic EQ almost. Like I kind of wanted to boost everything, but not everything in the same frequency band at the same time. So I'm still like really afraid of multipressors, and I don't use them very often. This was more of an experiment for me of trying to get it right. I actually messed with this a long time, just playing with different settings, and I still am kind of not really comfortable with them, but for whatever reason, I kind of liked the setting that I think this is like a preset in Logic, final hip hop compressor, add some bass, add some of the high mid. And I tweaked on that to get a sound that I liked. These single EQs are used for the build up and the drop, which I'll talk about in the arrangement. And then of course I've got a limiter on there. Okay, so it's not doing anything crazy. All it's doing is just keeping everything from getting too loud. That's it. Okay, so that's the main bass sound. So what is this thing called analog bass? Play it. It's exactly what it is. It sounds like an analog bass that I've high pass filtered. I've sucked out the 200 and I've kind of actually low passed the top end. So what is it doing? So after I designed this, what I called Neuro Bass 1, super creative name, right? I created analog bass, or it might have even been a preset. Let's check it out. Okay, I renamed it, but these are super, super easy. Envelope cranked all the way up, adjust your attack decay to get that really like a tacky kind of house, kind of those house plucks, those old things. But when I made that neuro bass in the mix, it didn't really sound like when I mixed it with the drums, it didn't really have a punch or an attack. So I just added this analog bass layer underneath it to give it a little bit of an attack. And it's super soft in the mix, but it actually makes a pretty big difference. Let me see. So if I just solo this guy. So you can see it just adds that little bit of extra kind of like presence in the mix. And I'm not going to go too deep in this. It's all my standard stuff, the overdrive plugin, and then also this analog enveloper. Just adding even more attack to that sound. This is basically a transient shaper if you're familiar with those. I don't use these a lot, but they're pretty helpful, honestly. It's a little bit cheesy. It's kind of like adding an envelope to your transients, but works pretty well. And a little bit of stereo spread, or a lot, and silver reverb, which is probably, not doing a whole lot because I ended up going to a bus reverb. Okay, the last sound I'm going to talk about is this Neuro Bass 2, which sounds something like this. Okay, sorry I let that play so long, but I love that sound. So what is that? This Neuro Bass 2 is basically a channel for channel copy of my Neuro Bass 1. So if I bring both of those up, one's on top, two's on the bottom. Basically I copied this patch, redid it, and you can see the settings are pretty similar. I changed the envelope and the cutoff just a tiny bit, just to make it a little like squelch, like that kind of sound. And it's, I think it should be, you can't tell there. Maybe I didn't. It should be super high pass filter. It doesn't look like it is. I guess well, let's see what single EQ is. Okay, yeah, I'm high pass filtering this thing at 1,000 hertz. So this has like no low end in it. It's just meant to give you those squishy, squelchy, like those kind of sounds. So without any plugins. Right? Similar Neuro sound. Bit crush. Sorry, I'm probably blowing your ear. Auto filter. Yeah, so now that's getting some of that nice bass movement. So got a bandpass filter, cutoff dialed in resonance, and then I've got the LFO driving that cutoff. So you might say, well, why don't you use the LFO or on the synth? Well, this synth I don't even think has an LFO that can really act on the frequency the way I would want it to in this case. I really want this filter to be after like the first distortion because I really want it to kind of feel like it's like breathing and you get that raspiness. I love that. I could make these sounds all day, every day. It's so fun. Okay, and then again, my little trick, the notch filter. So what you can see, right, is that with the LFO going, that's kind of an almost boring, repetitive thing. But when you add this notch filter on top of it, the kind of the randomness and the squelchiness kind of becomes more interesting. And to be honest, this is again just kind of all by ear, messing around, doing loops of automation, and just kind of layering up the other bass and going, yeah, that's going to sound really cool in the mix. But as you can hear, there's a ton of sub in it. Ooh, I love that sound. Go back. That was cool. Yeah, that tearing sound. So cool. So that's what the single EQ is. Now with that on. Yeah, so all that's doing, right, is it's just adding like a little bit of squelchiness to the high end of the bass sound, but it makes a humongous difference in the impact of the bass itself. And then finally, I've got a Space Designer. Again, I don't know if you remember, but Space Designer is just a reverb plug in Logic. And let me see, I think there is some automation on that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and listen to it. So you can see I'm automating the reverb to kind of give this like echoey, like kind of this enveloped reverb sound. And I don't know where I learned this trick. I don't think that's something that I just thought of. It might have just been something I heard in a track and thought, oh, that's really cool. There's probably easier ways to do it. There's probably plugins that kind of do that for you. But yeah, I just kind of drew in some on some of the notes to give it some impact and some interest and characteristic. And that's what you hear in a track a lot. So even though this sound is mixed really low overall, it plays a huge role in like making the track sound kind of cool and making the bass have a lot of interest. So, okay, those are the main elements. In the next video, I'm going to cut out now. I'm going to talk about these higher neuro bass sounds. I don't know what this one called Cheese Ball is. Oh, that's not in the bass bus. Okay. And then I'll talk about how I bust all this stuff together to make one cohesive bass. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.